Everyone told her not to go, that the island was cursed, haunted by the past. But an 8-month pregnant woman named Emma Collins didn't believe in ghost stories. She only wanted to sign the papers and leave. Yet when her loyal German Shepherd Ranger began digging beneath the rotting floorboards of the old cabin on Hollow Rock Island, she uncovered something her late husband's family had buried for generations. What they found would rewrite everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and legacy. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. The morning mist rolled in from Casco Bay, painting the windows of the small apartment in pale gray. Inside, Emma Collins sat by the kitchen table, her hands curled around a chipped mug of tea that had long gone cold. She was 32, slender but strong, with tired green eyes and freckles that once gave her face a warmth she no longer felt. Her dark auburn hair, usually tied back, hung loose today, framing a face that had forgotten how to smile. Her body carried the unmistakable weight of late pregnancy, 8 months along her belly, round beneath a faded wool sweater, her breath sometimes shallow, as though even air had grown heavier these days. Outside, the world continued as if her grief did not matter. It had been 9 months since the sea had taken her husband Michael Collins, a fisherman, whose laughter once filled this apartment. He had been 35, broad-shouldered, sunburned from years on the water, the kind of man who smelled of salt and diesel, who worked hard and spoke softly. The Coast Guard found his boat wrecked against the rocks near Monhegan Island, but his body never returned. Emma had buried an empty coffin instead, and since that day she had been living in a silence that even time couldn't thaw. The only sound in her home now was the soft padding of Ranger, her 7-year-old German Shepherd. His coat was a mix of sable brown and black, his eyes amber like burnt honey. Ranger had belonged to Michael first, and after his death, the dog had attached himself to Emma with a quiet, unyielding loyalty. Sometimes she felt that he too carried the same grief, guarding her not just out of instinct, but out of love for the man they had both lost. The air smelled faintly of rain and sea salt. Emma stared out the window, watching gulls wheel above the water, their cries echoing through the fog. Her life had narrowed to simple repetitions. Wake up, eat, work remotely for the insurance office. Walk Ranger along the shore, sleep, repeat. She spoke to no one. Portland's noise had become distant, almost foreign, as if she lived inside a bubble of stillness where nothing could reach her anymore. On the table beside her lay a small stack of unpaid bills, a grocery list scrawled in pencil, and the envelope that would change everything. It had arrived that morning, thick and cream-colored, with her name written neatly in blue ink, Mrs. Emma Collins. No return address, only a seal from a law firm in Bar Harbor. She hesitated before opening it, the paper trembling between her fingers. Inside was a formal letter printed on heavy stationery. We are writing to inform you of an inheritance pertaining to the estate of Mr. Thomas Avery, deceased formerly of Hollow Rock Island, off the coast of Maine. Through your late husband, Michael Collins, you have been identified as the rightful heir to said property. Emma read it twice, unable to make sense of the words. The name Thomas Avery tugged faintly at her memory. Michael's grandfather, perhaps. He had spoken of him only once years ago, calling him the old shipbuilder who lost his mind to the sea. After that, he changed the subject, his tone heavy with something between resentment and sorrow. She hadn't pressed him then. Now the ghost of that story had come knocking. An island, she murmured aloud, her voice hoarse from disuse. Ranger lifted his head from the rug, ears pricked. She looked down at him and almost laughed. What am I supposed to do with an island boy? He tilted his head as if he too was asking the same thing. The letter continued. The property included a cabin and its surrounding land maintained in trust, taxes paid up to date. The firm required her to inspect the site before any transfer could be completed. There was even a contact number scrawled at the bottom in pen. Emma leaned back in her chair, one hand unconsciously resting on her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her ribs. The thought of leaving Portland, even for a few days, felt impossible, and yet a small spark flickered somewhere inside her. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was that strange word she hadn't dared think in months, hope. She rose slowly, stretching her back, then walked to the window. The fog outside had thickened, wrapping the harbor in ghostly light. Down below, the sound of distant waves hitting the rocks carried through the open crack in the glass. She closed her eyes and listened. For the first time in a long while, she felt something calling to her, quiet, persistent, like the tide returning to shore. Behind her, Ranger whined softly, sensing the change in her breathing. "Maybe we should see it," she whispered. "Just once." She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the counter beside Michael's old compass, the one he used to keep in his jacket pocket every time he went to sea. The brass was tarnished now, but when she flipped the lid open, the needle still pointed north, steady and sure. "Guess we've got somewhere to go after all," she said faintly, her voice breaking just enough to remind her she was still alive. Ranger's tail brushed against her leg, gentle as reassurance. Outside, the mist began to lift, revealing the gray-blue horizon. Somewhere beyond it waited Hollow Rock Island, and a name that sounded like both a warning and a promise. And though Emma didn't yet understand why, she knew she couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. Rain streaked across the windshield as Emma guided her old SUV north along the winding coastal roads of Maine. The world outside blurred into a palette of gray and pine green, the kind of landscape that felt ancient and indifferent to human sorrow. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale. Beside the hum of the engine, there was only the sound of the rain and the rhythmic breathing of Ranger, her loyal German shepherd, who sat alert in the back seat. His eyes, deep amber and intelligent, watched the passing woods with a strange intensity, as though something in him recognized this route, this air thick with sea mist and pine resin. The trip had taken hours, and the further they went, the quieter Emma became. The grief that had dulled in Portland seemed to stir again as she left behind the last trace of the city. She thought of Michael, the way he used to sing to the radio on long drives, one arm resting casually out the window, his hair tousled by the wind. The memory tightened her chest like an old wound refusing to heal. By mid-afternoon, she reached Bar Harbor, a quaint coastal town nestled against the Atlantic. The place looked like something out of a forgotten postcard, wooden houses with chipped paint fishing boats bobbing in the gray water and narrow streets that smelled of rain and salt. Emma parked in front of a weathered coffee shop whose sign read, "The Anchor's Rest." A bell chimed softly as she stepped inside, the warmth of roasted beans wrapping around her like a blanket. The man behind the counter looked up and smiled, a thin, silver-haired figure with watery blue eyes and hands that trembled slightly when he poured coffee. His name tag read Tom Weaver. Tom was in his late 60s, tall but stooped, his frame wiry from years of hard labor. His skin was tanned and lined, the kind of skin that told stories of ocean wind and sun. He wore a thick gray sweater with a frayed collar and an old brass ring on his right hand, which he twisted absently as he spoke. "You must be Emma Collins," he said with a voice roughened by time. "I figured you'd come eventually. Thomas Avery's granddaughter-in-law, right?" His tone carried both curiosity and the weary familiarity of someone who had seen generations pass through the same small town. Emma nodded hesitantly. "I didn't think anyone would recognize the name." Tom chuckled softly. "Around here, folks don't forget much. Your husband's grandfather, Thomas Avery, was a stubborn man. Good heart but haunted. Used to come here for supplies. Always alone." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Said he'd built something on that island that couldn't be sold, even if it meant losing everything else." Emma frowned. "Do you know what it was?" The old man shook his head slowly. He never said, only that he'd leave a key for the one who was meant to return. He bent down and reached beneath the counter, retrieving a small metal box. From it, he pulled out an iron key, long and rusted, its teeth worn dull by time. "He gave this to me 20 years ago. Told me someone would come for it one day." When Emma's fingers brushed the key, a shiver ran through her. The metal was cold, almost too cold, and she couldn't help but feel that it had been waiting then all this time, not just for anyone, but for her. After a short meal of coffee and chowder, Emma stepped back into the fading light of late afternoon. The rain had thinned to a fine drizzle. She followed the directions Tom had given her down a narrow gravel road that led to a small pier jutting into the gray expanse of the bay. The lake was still, its surface broken only by distant ripples of rain. At the end of the dock, an old wooden rowboat swayed gently, a coil of rope still tied to the post. A tarnished nameplate on its side read Avery. Ranger climbed in first, sniffing the damp wood, his tail flicking once as if in approval. Emma followed, lowering herself carefully with one hand on her stomach, feeling the baby shift faintly inside her. The oars were heavy, but she rowed with a slow, determined rhythm, each stroke cutting through the water with a sound like whispered memory. Halfway across, the fog thickened, and for a moment she could see nothing but white. The world vanished into silence except for the creak of wood and the dog's steady breathing. Then out of the mist, the shape of Hollow Rock Island, emerged a dark mass of rock and evergreen, its edges glistening with moss. By the time she reached the shore, evening had settled, painting everything in silver blue. The island was small, barely a mile across, with a slope that rose toward the center where a cabin stood, its roof bowed and walls mottled with lichen. The structure looked fragile yet defiant, like something that had outlasted storms by sheer will. Emma stepped onto the sand, her boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The air was sharp with salt and decay. Ranger ran ahead, barking once, his voice echoing through the trees before disappearing into the distance. When she reached the cabin, the door hung slightly ajar. She hesitated, then pushed it open. The hinges groaned and the scent of dust and old wood filled her lungs. Inside, the place was dim lit only by the soft gray light filtering through cracked windows. Furniture lay under sheets, a kettle rusted on the stove, and a single lantern stood on a table beside a pile of old photographs. She brushed the dust away from one. It showed a bearded man standing beside a wooden boat, his eyes bright and proud. She knew without needing to read the name on the back, Thomas Avery. Ranger barked again, this time from below. Emma followed the sound to a narrow trap door near the back wall. She knelt the floor cold beneath her knees and tugged at the iron handle. The door lifted with a creak, revealing darkness and the scent of damp earth. Ranger's ears pricked forward, his tail stiff with alertness. "Easy, boy," she whispered, her heart pounding. She descended 2 steps before stopping. The beam of her flashlight swept across the cellar, empty shelves, rotted wood, and then in the far corner, a shape half buried under dust, a large iron chest, its lock rusted but still intact. Emma stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. Something about it felt final, sacred. She reached out, brushing her fingers across the surface. The metal was cold and unyielding, like a heartbeat trapped in stone. She whispered softly, "What were you hiding?" Thomas Ranger stood beside her, ear forward, eyes fixed on the chest. Outside, the sea roared faintly against the rocks, as if answering a question that had waited far too long. The night pressed down heavy on Hollow Rock Island, the air thick with salt and the groaning breath of the sea. The small cabin creaked under the assault of wind and rain, its roof leaking in slow, rhythmic drops that tapped against the tin basin Emma had placed beneath it. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a lantern glowing weakly beside her, throwing soft golden light across the room. Her belly rose beneath her sweater, taut and round, and every so often she placed a hand upon it, feeling the baby shift like a whisper beneath her skin. Ranger curled nearby on an old rug, lifted his head whenever the wind howled, his ears pricking, his body tense, before he sighed and lowered it again. He was her sentinel, his sable coat glinting amber in the lantern's light, his eyes half open, ever watchful. The storm outside had stolen sleep from her. There was something about the place, the weight of time, the faint scent of oil and wood that stirred a restless curiosity. Her gaze fell upon the iron chest they had uncovered earlier. It sat near the wall, still streaked with dust, its rusted lock now broken from the strike of the old hammer she had found. For hours she had avoided opening it, afraid of what it might reveal. Now, beneath the symphony of storm and silence, she reached forward and lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of objects arranged with the precision of someone who had loved order. A folded wool blanket, a tin compass, a wooden pipe still faintly smelling of tobacco, and beneath these a bundle of letters bound with a blue ribbon, their paper yellowed and edges curled by moisture. Resting beside them were several sheets of parchment covered in neat, deliberate sketches. Blueprints. The first showed the outline of a house, small square or its walls reinforced by thick crossbeams. In one corner, written in careful cursive, was a single line, "A home strong enough to weather solitude." Emma traced the words with her fingertip, her throat tightening. The handwriting was steady but fragile, each letter marked by time and tremor. She turned to the letters and untied the ribbon, the faint scent of cedar and salt rising as the paper shifted. The first was addressed to Michael Collins, her late husband, dated 23 years earlier. Her breath caught. "To my grandson," it began. The ink was faded but legible. "If you are reading this, it means the island has chosen you. I do not keep it for wealth or pride, but because some places hold the memory of who we are. The sea takes what it wants, but the land, if we honor it, keeps what truly matters." She paused, tears welling as she read the next lines. You will not understand this now. You will think I was running from the world. But I stayed to build something that could endure even if I could not. Emma pressed the letter against her lips, her eyes closing. Michael had never mentioned these letters. He must have never received them. She could almost see the man who had written them, Thomas Avery, the old shipbuilder, with his hands scarred from years of labor, his gray beard, salt-stiffened eyes the color of the deep sea. In her mind, he sat at this very table decades ago, writing by lantern light as a storm raged outside the same way she was sitting now. She read another. The storms are growing stronger this year. The roof holds but barely. I have begun sketching a new home, a proper one. It will stand near the waterline where the land breathes. I will build it for her, though she is gone. Emma's fingers trembled. For her, she whispered. The missing piece of the story clicked into place. Thomas had lost someone, his wife perhaps, and this island was the grave he could not leave. The words became heavier, with each page filled with regret, guilt, and the slow unraveling of a man who loved the sea too deeply to escape its pull. When she reached the final letter, the ink had bled with water, but one phrase remained clear. If you ever come here, do not sell it. Finish what I began. Emma sat for a long while in silence, tears streaking her cheeks. Ranger lifted his head and moved closer, resting his chin gently on her knee. Maybe that's why we're here, she murmured, stroking his fur. To finish it. Outside, the storm began to fade. The wind softened into a sigh and the rhythmic crash of waves grew slower, steadier, almost like breathing. The lantern flickered low. Emma folded the letters carefully and returned them to the chest, but she kept one blueprint in her lap, the sketch of the small home with its deep foundations. The idea of building anything felt absurd. She didn't know the first thing about construction, and yet something in those lines spoke to her something more than design resolve. When morning came, the island was washed clean by rain. Mist curled along the ground like smoke, and the air smelled of wet pine and soil. Emma stepped outside, her boots sinking slightly into the moss. Ranger trotted ahead, tail wagging lightly, his nose to the ground. He led her along a narrow trail that wound past a cluster of birch trees until they reached a shallow stream cutting through the island's heart. Its water was crystal clear, rippling over smooth stones. Emma knelt, cupping her hands to drink the cold biting her skin. That was when Ranger began to dig. At first she thought he was chasing a scent, but as his paws tore into the soft mud, something metallic glinted beneath. What is it, boy? She asked, leaning closer. With a few more scrapes, he unearthed a pile of weathered planks and rusted tools, a handsaw, an axe head, a box of bent nails, all half buried in the earth. Emma stared in awe. These were not random debris. They were the remnants of a workshop long abandoned. She recognized the same crossbeam pattern carved into one of the planks that appeared on the blueprints. He was building it, she whispered. He was really building it. The morning light broke through the mist, illuminating her face streaked with dirt and wonder. She placed a hand on her stomach and looked toward the trees where the cabin stood hidden among the green. We'll finish it, she said softly, as if answering someone she could almost hear. Ranger barked once sharp and certain, as if sealing a pact between them and the ghost of the man who had waited all these years. The sky darkened without warning. Clouds gathered above Hollow Rock Island like a slow-moving bruise, and the wind carried the metallic scent of rain long before the first drops fell. Emma Collins stood near the half-built frame of the small house, her hands blistered from hours of work. Her 8-month belly strained against her worn wool coat, every movement deliberate and slow. She wiped the sweat and sawdust from her forehead, staring at the skeletal beams she had raised over the past week. The structure was crude but alive, each nail and joint a quiet defiance against her grief. Ranger, her German shepherd, watched from a few paces away, his thick sable coat dusted with sawdust, his tail swishing lazily. He had become her partner in every sense, dragging branches, guarding tools, warning her of the weather before she could even sense it. Now as the wind picked up, his ears flattened and his eyes narrowed toward the horizon. Emma followed his gaze. The line between sea and sky had vanished, replaced by a wall of gray that rippled like a living thing. She knew that look. It was the kind of storm Maine fishermen spoke of in low voices, the kind that came sudden, hard, and unforgiving. Her breath caught. We should get inside, she said softly, though her voice trembled more from memory than fear. The last time she'd heard the ocean roar like that was the night they lost Michael, her husband. The same kind of wind, the same unrelenting water. She pressed a hand to her stomach as if to shield the child from olden ghosts. Inside the old cabin, she moved quickly, closing shutters and checking the lantern. Ranger paced by the door, restless, whining low in his throat. The air grew heavy, vibrating with distant thunder. When the first flash of lightning tore the sky, it illuminated the island in a single breath of white light. The half-built house, the fallen branches, the vast emptiness of sea. Emma sat on the floor beside the lantern, knees drawn up, trying to steady her breathing. She thought of the letters from Thomas Avery, her late husband's grandfather, the man who had written about storms like this. "No home worth keeping is built in calm weather," he had said. She repeated it silently, but her voice felt fragile against the wind. The storm hit in full. Wind screamed through the cracks, slamming the shutters open despite her efforts. Rain burst through the roof seams, turning the floor into shallow puddles. Emma struggled to push a table against the door as it rattled under the force of the gale. Outside, Ranger barked furiously, refusing to retreat. "Ranger, come here," she shouted, but her voice was swallowed by thunder. The dog darted toward the unfinished structure outside, barking at something she couldn't see. Lightning split the sky again, and in that flash she saw a massive birch tree swaying dangerously near the house's frame. The next sound was a deafening crack. The tree snapped, collapsing in a shower of rain and splinters. Emma screamed as she stumbled backward, and the impact shaking the ground beneath her. Half of the roof gave way, crashing down with it. Ranger howled, his body already moving. Emma tried to stand, but her foot slipped on the wet floor. Pain shot up her side as she fell hard, one hand instinctively clutching her stomach. The baby kicked a jolt of life in fear that sent tears streaming down her face. "Ranger," she gasped. The dog appeared through the rain, soaked and trembling, but unhurt. He ran to her side, teeth clamping on her sleeve, tugging her toward the far corner of the cabin. "No, no," she tried to protest, but he pulled harder, dragging her away from the collapsing wall. The noise was unbearable, wind howling through broken beams, rain pounding like stones, the groan of old wood surrendering. Emma covered her belly with both arms, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken since Michael's funeral. Ranger's growl cut through the storm as he pushed against the fallen debris with his paws clawing at the heavy planks to clear a space. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours before the wind began to fade, replaced by the softer rhythm of rain. The lantern had gone out, leaving only the pale, silvery light of dawn breaking through the ruin. Emma opened her eyes to see the roof half torn away, the frame of the new house splintered into a jagged silhouette. Water dripped steadily from the rafters. Her body ached, but she was alive. Ranger lay beside her, his fur-soaked chest rising and falling in slow, labored breaths. "Oh, Ranger," she whispered, her voice cracking. She crawled toward him, stroking his wet fur. "You saved us." The exhaustion hit her like a wave. She sat amid the wreckage, rain mingling with tears as she looked around the destruction. Everything she had built, the fragile hope that had carried her through the days, was now in ruins. She wanted to scream, to curse the sea, the ski, and the island itself. "Why did I come here?" she said, aloud, her voice echoing against the empty space. "I can't do this. I can't." She thought of leaving, of packing what little she had, rowing back to Bar Harbor, calling the number from the lawyer's letter, and signing whatever papers would free her from this place. But then she looked at Ranger lying with his head against her leg, eyes half open, trusting, loyal, even in exhaustion. And beneath her hand she felt another small kick, a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Emma closed her eyes, hearing again the voice of Thomas Avery through his words on the page. "Nothing worth keeping is ever born of sunny days." She exhaled slowly. "All right," she whispered, looking at the wreckage around her. "Then we'll start again." She reached for a beam, forcing herself to her feet. The pain was sharp, but bearable. Ranger stirred, lifting his head, watching her as if understanding. Outside, the storm clouds were breaking apart, revealing a slice of pale blue sky. The wind was quieter now, carrying the scent of pine and salt. Emma stood amid the ruin of what she had tried to build, the air cold against her damp skin, and felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. "We stay," she said softly, her voice steady. "We finish it for him, for you, for all of us." Ranger let out a low bark in answer, his tail sweeping once against the floor. And so beneath the broken beams and the fading storm, Emma made her decision. She would not leave the island. She would rebuild, not for survival, but for legacy. The sea could roar, the wind could break her walls, but she would remain. The house would rise again, and this time it would stand. Spring crept onto Hollow Rock Island like a soft confession. The last shards of snow melted into the moss, and the trees once stripped bare by winter's fury now shimmered with the first hint of green. The air smelled of earth and renewal, sharp with salt and pine. Emma Collins stood outside her small, rebuilt home, her hands resting on her rounded belly, now nearing the final month of pregnancy. The house wasn't perfect. Its walls were uneven, its roof patched with boards scavenged from the ruins, but it stood. It breathed. It was hers. The sound of hammering had faded days ago, replaced by the hum of waves and the distant calls of seabirds. Ranger, her loyal German shepherd, 7 years old but carrying himself with the quiet dignity of a guardian, lay on the porch, his eyes fixed toward the horizon. His coat had thickened with the season, and a faint gray now dusted the fur around his muzzle, a subtle reminder of the years that had weathered them both. Emma moved slowly, fatigue shadowing her movements, but there was lightness in her steps. The past months had reshaped her, not just in body but in spirit. The storms had taken so much, yet in their aftermath, she had found herself stronger, surer. Each nail, each wall rebuilt, had become an act of defiance against despair. The house had risen from wreckage like a quiet vow to both the living and the dead. Inside, it smelled faintly of smoke and pine sap. The small wood stove in the corner burned softly, and light filtered through the curtains she had sewn from old linen sacks. On the windowsill sat a photograph she had found inside the chest weeks before Thomas Avery, her husband's grandfather, his lined face stern but not unkind, his eyes fixed on the horizon, much like Ranger's now. That morning, as the tide retreated, Emma decided to tidy the house one last time before resting. Her back ached, but she found peace in the rhythm of small work, wiping dust, folding blankets, sorting the few tools she had salvaged. It was while cleaning near the kitchen wall that she noticed something strange. One of the wooden panels near the stove had a faint seam unlike the others. She pressed against it gently. It shifted, revealing a narrow hollow behind it. Inside lay a small bundle wrapped in waxed oilcloth, untouched by time. Her breath caught as she unwrapped it, revealing a letter, its edges browned, but the ink still legible. The handwriting was unmistakable, Thomas Avery's, that same steady cursive that had filled the letters in the chest. But this one was different. It was addressed not to Michael or any name at all, but simply to whoever stays. Emma sat down slowly, the floor creaking under her weight, and began to read. If you have come this far, it means you chose to stay. I built this island not as a refuge, but as a reminder. The sea teaches us loss. The land teaches us endurance. Both will take from you, but if you stand long enough, they will also give you something greater. I called this place Hollow Rock not for its emptiness, but because every hollow holds the echo of what was once there. We are the echoes now. Keep them alive. Build even when no one watches. Love even when no one answers. That is the only way to endure. Emma's eyes blurred with tears. Her thumb traced the final line written in a frailer hand. The island is not an inheritance, it is a lesson. Every beginning requires courage, especially when you are alone. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her chest. For a long moment she sat in silence, the fire crackling softly beside her. Then she looked down at her stomach, feeling a small kick beneath her palm. We stayed, didn't we, she whispered. And we'll tell your great-grandfather's story someday. You'll know what he built here and why. Outside, Ranger stirred suddenly, his head lifting, ears perked toward the distant sound of gulls crying over the sea. He barked once deep and full of life, then trotted out to the edge of the porch, staring toward the horizon. The sky was ablaze with color, amber gold, and rose melting into the endless blue of the ocean. The light caught in his fur, turning it almost silver. Emma followed his gaze and smiled faintly. The house behind her glowed in the sunset, its windows reflecting the fire of the dying day. It was small, imperfect, and full of memories she hadn't lived but somehow remembered. She sat down on the porch steps beside Ranger, resting one hand on her belly and the other on the old dog's back. His tail thumped once a quiet rhythm against the wood. The wind brushed her face, carrying with it the scent of the sea and something else, something sacred and calm. For the first time since Michael's death, Emma felt no heaviness in her chest. The island no longer felt haunted, it felt alive. It had tested her, broken her, and rebuilt her, piece by piece. She understood now what Thomas Avery had meant. Some places are not meant to be owned, only understood. The sun dipped lower, painting the water in ribbons of fire. Ranger barked again, this time softer, almost joyful. Emma laughed through her tears, a sound light and real. "I know, boy," she murmured. "He's watching, isn't he?" As the last light faded, she rose, placing the letter on the table beside the oil lamp. Its flame flickered, casting long shadows across the wooden walls, the same walls she had built with her own hands. She whispered a final promise into the quiet air. "I'll keep building, Thomas. For all of us." When the stars emerged over the Black Sea, the house stood steady against the wind, its chimney breathing soft plumes of smoke. Inside, Ranger slept at the door, and Emma lay beneath the quilt, one hand resting over the life she carried. Outside, Hollow Rock Island exhaled into the night, a small world reclaimed from loss, built on endurance and ready for whatever dawn might bring. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. They come quietly, like a woman rebuilding a home with trembling hands, like an old dog keeping watch through every storm, like the strength to rise again after everything has fallen apart. On Hollow Rock Island, Emma didn't find treasure. She found something greater: faith. The kind of faith that reminds us that even when we are alone, we are never truly abandoned, because God doesn't always calm the storm. Sometimes he teaches us how to build shelter within it. So if you're watching this now, maybe this story found you for a reason. Maybe there's something in your life that feels broken, unfinished, or forgotten. But remember, even in your smallest acts of courage, heaven is watching. Miracles still exist in those who refuse to give up. May God bless everyone who believes in second chances, who rebuilds even when their hands are tired, and who trusts that love like faith never truly dies. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what miracle you're waiting for, and don't forget to subscribe, because every story here is a reminder that grace still walks among us. May God bless you and your home tonight.